Do you struggle with learning jazz standards? I bet you've watched a ton of YouTube videos telling you you need to learn these 3 songs. These are the top 5 standards you need to learn. The big problem is they never tell you why. Why do you need to learn those songs? What is it about Autumn Leaves, Stella by Starlight, Alone Together that means you should be learning them? By the end of this video, you're going to know how to learn jazz standards better than 99% of jazz guitarists or jazz teachers out there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down the foundation of what are the most common chords in jazz, the most common jazz progressions, and therefore what is the best order for you to learn jazz standards, no matter what level you are. So if you're more beginner or intermediate or even advanced, you know exactly where to start in this order of jazz standards and why you are learning them that way. This is so that you can minimize the amount of new information that you're learning and maximize the efficiency in your practice. So let's start right at the beginning, talking about the harmony in jazz. And we'll look at the 4 most common chords in jazz. And that would be major 7, dominant 7, minor 7, and minor 7 flat 5 or half diminished. These are the 4 most common 7th chords, otherwise known as chords that have 4 distinct notes in them. Without a discussion of what are the most common chords, we're really just picking these tunes at random because we like them or because another teacher said we should learn them. I analyzed over 100 of the most common jazz standards to come up with this analysis for the most common chords, jazz progressions, and then what tunes we should learn in order. So that's based on this. And looking at those top 100 songs, I'm going to tell you the top 5 most common major 7 chords. And those are F major 7, E flat major 7, B flat major 7, C major 7, and A flat major 7. Now with those chords, you'll see the percentage number that chord is in the top 100 songs. For example, F major 7 is in 51% of the top 100 jazz standards. And the 5th most common one, A flat major 7, is in 27% of jazz standards. Now, why do we care what percent of the top 100 jazz standards each chord is in? This is really just a way of showing us whether that chord and all the chords related to it, the keys, etc., is foundational for learning jazz standards. Meaning, if we're going to learn these jazz standards in an efficient way, we want to make sure that the chords we're focused on are used most of the time in these jazz standards. We don't want to learn something, focus on B major 7, if it's barely used in most of the songs. It lets us know that's not a very common chord we're seeing, and it's not something we have to focus our time on in order to learn these things efficiently. One thing we notice here with those first 5 most common major 7 is, with the exception of C major 7, they're all flat keys. F major, B flat, E flat, and A flat are all flat keys. And part of that is because in the history of jazz, most of these songs were written by or for a lot of horn players who play in transposed keys, B flat, E flat. And we see a lot of songs written in those keys. They sound right for jazz. As opposed to, let's say, Brazilian bossa nova, which many songs were written by guitarists, and a lot of those songs end up in sharp keys. So there's a little bit of a distinction there between jazz standards and the Brazilian jazz genre. Let's move on to the dominant 7 chords. The 5 most common dominant 7 chords are C7, F7, G7, B flat 7, and D7. And actually, dominant 7 chords in general are way more common than even major 7 chords. So it's a little curious that a lot of times guitar teachers will have us focus on major 7 chords when the majority of harmony within any given jazz standard is actually dominant 7 chord quality. You'll see even the 5th most common dominant 7 chord is still in 52% of the top 100 jazz standards. Moving on to minor 7 chords, the 5 most common minor 7 chords we have are D minor 7, G minor 7, C minor 7, A minor 7, and F minor 7. These minor 7 chords are also very common. Not quite as common as dominant 7, but still more common than major 7. And we'll get to why this is in a minute. Finally, for minor 7 flat 5 chords, the 5 most common ones we see are A minor 7 flat 5, D minor 7 flat 5, E minor 7 flat 5, B minor 7 flat 5, and G minor 7 flat 5. One thing you'll notice from these chords and the percentage that they're used is it's actually way less frequent. So focusing on minor 2/5s and things of that nature using half diminished chords is something that should be reserved for when you're really a more intermediate or advanced guitarist. Now, looking at all of these 5 most common chords as a whole and how they relate to each other, we can also understand what are the most common keys for jazz standards. And we get some of the ones that you're expecting. We get F, B flat, C, E flat, and A flat are some of our most common major keys that we want to focus on. That means you should learn those scales, arpeggios, associated chords in those keys as the most bang for your buck when practicing. But it also means that the associated minor keys are also more common. So C minor and D minor end up being our most common minor keys for jazz standards. So when we looked at these chords in detail, we saw that the minor 7 and dominant 7 chords were the most played in any of these top 100 jazz standards, even more than major 7. And this also leads us to the most common progression in jazz, which is the 2/5-1. And that is why we have these minor 7 and dominant 7 as the highest percentage. So let's take a 2/5-1 such as 2/5-1 to C, right? D minor 7, G7, and C major 7. In that case, we have a minor 7, dominant 7, and major 7 chord. But what if we're doing another type of progression? What if we're linking these 2/5-1s together? For example, what if we do a 3-6-2-5-1? So E minor 7 to A7, D minor, and G7. We might not even go to the 1 chord. Many jazz standards work like this, where we have 2/5-1s that go into another 2/5-1. And we may not even get to the major 7 resolution. So this means that we end up with an emphasis on minor 7 and dominant chords and not as many major 7 chords. This 2/5-1 progression, which is really referencing whatever resolution point you're going to. So again, in the case of C, D is the 2nd note of that scale and G is the 5th note of that major scale. So that gives us 2 for D minor, 5 for G, 1 if it was C. And a lot of times we'll just talk about 2/5 and whatever the chord we're going to is the assumed 1 chord. Now in jazz, we don't always do 2/5 to 1. We can also do 2/5 to other notes of the scale. Like I just showed you when we did a 3-6, that could be thought of as a 2/5 to the 2. So let's quickly go through the 2/5-1s that you might see in any given jazz standard. These are the most common 2/5-1s. And then we'll talk about which songs would be good for practicing these and which songs actually have many of these or all of these even to practice your 2/5-1s. So starting off, we could have a 2/5 to the 1, D minor, G7 to C major. We could have a 2/5 to the 2. Many times this is not played as a minor 2/5, it's just a regular 2/5. E minor, A7 to D minor. You could see it with minor 7, flat 5, if we're in a minor key or doing things like that. We could have a 2/5 to the 3. In this case, you probably would see it as a minor 2/5. We could have a 2/5 to the 4, so G minor, C7 to F major. This is one of the most common ways that a jazz standard will go to the bridge. Think of something like Take the A Train, which has 2/5s to the 1 in the A section, and then 2/5s to the 4 to lead us into the bridge section. You can even have a 2/5 to the 5, so this would be something like A minor, D7 going to G. And many times, this is actually what's going on when we think of a 2/7 chord. Again, like in Take the A Train, when we have a D7, where's that coming from? Well, it's a 2/5 leading to the 5. We could have a 2/5 to the 6 chord. You would see this as a minor 2/5 most of the time. Now notice there, we had B half diminished and E7 going to A minor. That's another way of thinking about the 3/7 chord. Think of something like All of Me, right? E7. So there's those 6 main 2-5-1s. 2-5 to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We don't see a 2-5 to the 7, but we do sometimes see something called the backdoor 2-5. And this is where we do a 2-5 where the root movement from the dominant chord goes up a whole step. Let me just demonstrate. So a backdoor 2-5 to C would give us F minor, B flat 7, going up to C. This is something that you would see in many songs, but a common one is Lady Bird, has this kind of backdoor 2-5-1 resolution. So those are all of the most common 2-5-1 progressions, and that makes up the majority of jazz standards in general. Meaning if you master the most common chords I was talking about, and then the most common 2-5-1 progressions, you've almost already mastered the jazz standards that we're going to talk about next. So which of these songs, if you want to practice these 2-5-1s, should you focus on? Which songs are good for which kind of 2-5-1 progression? And I've actually worked out a bunch of different combinations for these 2-5-1s and which jazz standards they are in. So I want to go through that with you right now. Okay, if you're a complete beginner to jazz, the recommendation I would give you for learning 2-5-1s is to stick to songs where the 2-5-1 progressions stay within the key and they're very diatonic, especially ones focusing on 2-5 to 1 and 2-5 to 4, since those are the most common. And this is a good reason to learn something like Take the A Train, because we have that 2-5 to 1 for C and the 2-5 to 4. Those are the first two 2-5-1 progressions you want to really get in your fingers and in your ears. After that, you might move on to something like tune-up. And this is just if we're talking about learning 2-5-1s. This is not the progression I would recommend if you're trying to learn all about different aspects of jazz standards, just for focusing on 2-5-1s specifically. Tune-up is really good because it goes through 2-5-1s in different keys and cycles, right? So we have this kind of progression of E minor, A7 to D. Now this isn't a very common 2-5-1 resolution ending on D major, but the E minor and A7 happens. Then we have a D minor, G7 to C. That's pretty common. And then we get C minor, F7, B flat. So moving through these 2-5-1s, going down in these descending whole steps, is really helpful for being able to move in position, or whether you're on a different instrument, just moving that 2-5-1 progression you've practiced down in whole steps is pretty common. As you become more intermediate, this is where you might add in a song like Autumn Leaves, because it has a 2-5-1 in major and a 2-5-1 in minor. Now again, I'm not recommending it as the first song that you should learn, or one of the first, because it is complicated in the amount of chords it has and in dealing with major 2-5-1s and minor 2-5-1s. But it is good because we get both of those, right? So we have the C minor, F7, B flat, which is pretty common, and we get a common minor 2-5, A minor 7 flat 5, D7 to G minor. So it lets you practice two different kinds of 2-5-1s in common keys. After that, one of the best songs to learn if you're more intermediate advanced for 2-5-1 progressions is There Will Never Be Another You. And that's because it almost has every single kind of 2-5-1 that you're going to see in a relatively straightforward song. So we get almost all of the 2-5-1s with the exception of a 2-5-1 to 3. We even have the backdoor 2-5-1. So that's a great one. And honestly, the one I would probably focus on, since the 2-5-1 to the 3 chord is not as common. But if you want to tackle every single 2-5-1 that you might see, and you're more advanced, then you could learn Stella by Starlight. And this is because it has every one of those 2-5-1s I talked about. However, it's a complicated song. Unless you're intermediate and advanced, it's not really a song that you should be focusing on. A lot of other YouTube guitar teachers will talk about that song, even Autumn Leaves, as something that is the next one you should learn. And that's just not the case. Most of you guys watching this, let's be honest, do not have the foundation to tackle that song effectively. And I want you guys to have that foundation first, because it means you can learn these songs faster, easier, more efficiently, save yourself a bunch of time and frustration. So let's talk about what is this order for songs so that you can learn Stella by Starlight in the right path and you can feel motivated as you're learning and not trying to learn Stella and then getting stuck. So the whole concept of learning jazz standards in the best order is this: we want to minimize the amount of new information, the amount of new chords, progressions, etc. Minimize the amount of new information, allowing us to maximize our efficiency. We don't want to learn a song and then try and learn another song where none of the information we learned overlaps. We're not building on any hard-won knowledge. So my question when I was going through these 100 jazz standards and analyzing them was, how can we learn these songs in a way where you're learning the least amount of new chords, least amount of new progressions from moving from one song to the next? And there's a very straightforward path to do that. It really is very simple. I'm gonna tell you what those songs are. If you're interested in learning these songs with me, I am doing a live class for these songs starting on August 26th. If you're watching this after the fact, you can get the recordings for these as well. Go to the link in the description and check out all the information there. So the first song we want to learn is So What? And that's because we only have two chords we need to learn: D minor, E flat minor. And they're the same chord quality. As a matter of fact, just learning those two chords, D minor 7 and E flat minor 7, those two chords are in 78% of other jazz standards. So if you learn this song first and you go to all these top 100 jazz standards, 78 of them will have either a D minor or E flat minor. So we're gonna build on that foundation. After So What, we learn Milestones. And this is another modal tune that has G minor and A minor. And so we get to expand upon what we did with minor 7, D minor and E flat minor, but into some new keys. So we get comfortable applying what we learned into a new key, G minor and A minor, but still working with that same sort of minor pentatonic type of ideas, same type of voicings moved around. And when we do that, we increase the amount of song coverage, let's call it, to 86%. So D minor, E flat minor, G minor, and A minor are in 86% of jazz standards. After Milestones, we feel pretty good about minor 7, and we go to Little Sunflower. And the reason we do this is because it lets us build on what we've learned. Little Sunflower has D minor, so we get to review what we did in So What. And then we have E flat major and D major. Well, we already looked at D minor and E flat minor, so now we're going to look at E flat major and D major. We get that new chord quality to work on major 7, talk about how it relates to the minor pentatonic stuff we've learned in the previous ones, and build on that. Learn the arpeggios for major 7th in the right way so we can play them easily. Moving on from Little Sunflower, at that point, just adding in D major 7 and E flat major 7, our song percent coverage is 93%. There's only 7% of songs of that top 100 that do not have any of the chords we have learned at this point, with just 3 songs. After that, we move to Cantaloupe Island. And now Cantaloupe Island, we have some minor 7 chords. Right, with the F minor at the beginning. But now we get a dominant 7 chord with D flat 7. So we get to talk about how does dominant 7 chords work? How does it relate to the minor 7 type of ideas we've done? How can we use those minor pentatonics that we already know and just translate them to dominant 7? And then we get back to D minor, which we've practiced at this point a ton. We have a lot of confident ideas over D minor. Again, this song's only 3 chords. So far, all the songs we've done, first 2 are 2 chords, and then the next 2 are 3 chords. So we're not overwhelmed with the amount of chords. We can focus on playing melodic solos, learning the concepts, and applying them. At that point, your song coverage is 97%. Only 3 songs that do not have the chords we've learned up until this point. And then we finish off with Maiden Voyage. Now, Maiden Voyage has a bunch of dominant 7 chords, sus chords. We learn what the difference is between the dominant 7 and the sus, how they relate again to the minor 7 type of chords we've gone over. That will cover us for 98% of songs. There's actually only one more song we would need to add, and we would get 100% coverage. But for the first 5 songs, what we're gonna go over in this Master Standards Blueprint Level 0 in CGA Live, we're gonna go through those. All in total there, it's 11 chords that cover us for 98% of jazz standards. So if you learn these 11 chords, there is almost no jazz standard that you will encounter that doesn't have something that you know. And that's super important because that means you can build on a foundation. You're not learning a song that you don't know anything when you're looking at it. So I hope that's been an interesting way to look at the most common jazz chords, most common jazz progressions, and the Master Standards Blueprint, the order of songs that I suggest you learn jazz standards in. If you're interested in learning those jazz standards with me, check the link in the description. Come join Chase's Guitar Academy and CGA Live to learn these live with me. I've got a great curriculum prepared for you all. And if you join Chase's Guitar Academy, I have the full breakdown of all of the top 100 songs and the order that you should learn them in, no matter what level you are. Hope to see you guys there.